This video essay was first written by me and published for the collective Roots and Stitches, headed by Cat Weaver of the Cat Weaver podcast. The website has since been removed, so I've decided to share my opinions and experiences through the format of a video essay. The original article was first published in March 2023, and since I've had a lot more experience being an active member of the crafting and fibre arts community. I've attended a lot more knitting shows that did seem to make more of a commitment to diversity and inclusion, and I've started a YouTube channel focused on sharing my makes with you all. But overall, while I have taken steps to involve myself more within the community, I would say that the opinions expressed in this video essay generally remain unchanged. As someone who regularly consumes knitting content, I would like to call for more visibility for people of colour as makers, designers and content creators. We exist. We have a love for fibre arts, but we should all aspire to inspire an equally diverse new generation of fibre crafters to learn new skills and form inclusive crafting communities, and here's why. Crafting is no longer the exclusive domain for the time-rich and privileged. It's well documented that the pandemic has meant creative hobbies like knitting, for many, have been a source of meditation and solace at a time when the world was falling apart. We learned leisure pursuits that promote feelings of well-being and healing for the individual. It benefits society and should be something to which everyone has access. As a Black woman who loves gardening almost as much as knitting, I know that I can tune into BBC's Gardener's World on any given week and see Arrett Anderson, Poppy Okocha or Adverley Richmond, for example.
So you're in charge of the day.
I certainly am.
I get that.
Stellar ladies of colour literally diversifying the landscape of televised gardening. Gardening itself has only recently developed into a more inclusionary space in the media, presumably to appeal to a more youthful urban dweller, while still catering to their traditionally suburban and white audiences. The show is all the richer for it, positioning diverse women of colour as leaders and participants in areas where in the past they have been marginalised and erased. It is a small but powerful measure. Knitting, however, remains a predominantly white space. The 2023 Woolen Folk debacle notwithstanding. I have seen many, on the usual channels like Reddit and Twitter, use the bin fire that was the chaos at the Woolen Folk Festival in New York as an excuse to revel in stereotypes and avert racism because the organiser happens to be an African American woman. One high-profile negative portrayal should not represent the majority, just as one bad apple would not be used to determine the quality of the bushel. I would not have had to use such an analogy if the organiser of the yarn show had been white. In any case, knitters of colour have created channels and safe spaces to share anecdotes of mistreatment and racism in the mainstream knitting community, and the stories told hurt my soul. Thankfully, I don't personally have any harrowing tales, but I have visited yarn festivals where I was the only person of colour in attendance, and that's pretty isolating. For full disclosure, I'm no stranger to exclusively white spaces. Admittedly, some of my interests are considered fairly white. I like thrash metal and University Challenge, for example, so there's that.
White.
It is Snow White.
But being a person of colour at a yarn festival is not like being the only black girl in the mosh pit. For years at metal concerts, I stood tall with confidence that my race is well represented and influential in guitar music by virtuosos like Jimi Hendrix or Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Representation is important. It is a position of privilege when representation is a given and something one needs not consider. Little to no Black, Indigenous and people of colour visibility in knitting, nor efforts for inclusion at any level is something that makes me feel like an interloper in a community I hold dear. It's important to have these conversations because the silence of a glaring problem feels at best indifferent and at worst hostile. The existence of groups like the Black Girl Knits Club is one of those safe spaces organising knit nights in London and outreaches into their communities, encouraging young women of colour into craft. The hashtag #DiverseKnitty on social media and fibre artist Lorna Hamilton Brown's distinction awarded MA thesis, Myth, Black People Don't Knit, the importance of art and oral histories for documenting the experiences of Black knitters, confirms this is a conversation that needs to be had, but currently people of colour are the only ones having it. People of colour knit and create social media content for the wider crafting community, yet they do not appear on YouTube searches despite my ravenous appetite for knitting content. I preface internet searches with the word black to find BIPOC creators. For members of marginalised groups, representation matters. Representation has been shown to increase self-esteem. To see oneself reflected in the visibility of others from similar backgrounds or ethnic groups shows us what is possible for ourselves. We cannot be what we cannot see. I can attest from feelings of pride I felt when I learnt that the abolitionist Sojourner Truth was not just a butt-kicking women's rights activist, she was a knitter as well. Some dismiss affirmative action, but honestly, this is not a conversation for those people. This is a call for allyship, inclusion, and to address unconscious bias. When we demonstrate preferences for only what is familiar, it becomes normalised, sometimes to the exclusion of all else. Not necessarily because normal is better, but because it is the status quo. This is the working of unconscious racial bias as well, simultaneously reducing rights and opportunities for members of already marginalised groups. When everyone knits the same patterns by the same designers, it may not necessarily be because those patterns are better, but merely because we are more exposed to them. How ethnically diverse, for example, are the crafters you follow, or the producers of yarns and patterns you purchase?
You tell me.
No, you tell me. No.
It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling.
If we all operated from a position of abundance, we could make room for each other and everyone could have a proverbial seat at the table. Help advocate for diversity and give other creators a chance by being intentional about widening your exposure to makers of different backgrounds and ethnicities. If you like their work, recommend them to friends. Be welcoming to a person of colour at your local knit night, your yarn stores and crafting communities. It's a drop in the ocean of systemic oppression and marginalisation, but it would matter to the individual, and that's where change really begins, pushing us a little closer to equity and community. In the not so distant future, to a little black girl who wants to take up knitting or crochet, it will mean there is little doubt that she too is represented. She'll go to YouTube without having to preface searches for representation with black. She'll type in her craft of choice and will be greeted with diverse, talented knitters and content creators, and she'll think, this is my tribe. This is a space of acceptance, and I am welcome.